This 31-year-old scammed JP Morgan out of $175 million in an audacious attempt to fake it till she made it. Unfortunately for her, however, she didn't quite make it and is currently facing multiple charges of fraud and conspiracy, carrying maximums of up to 30 years in prison. Charlie Javice, a Wharton graduate, was the founder and CEO of Frank, a fintech company that helps college students fill out their financial aid applications, particularly the notoriously difficult FAFSA, or Free Application for Federal Student Aid. Frank promised to help students complete the FAFSA in as little as 7 minutes by scanning digital copies of their tax returns to autofill parts of the form. The service was described as similar to TurboTax, but for financial aid. The company boasted on their website that they had helped over 4 million students secure billions of dollars in financial aid. The startup landed Javice a spot on the coveted Forbes 30 Under 30 list in 2019, and in 2021, Frank was acquired by banking giant JP Morgan Chase for $175 million. But a little over 1 year later, in November 2022, JP Morgan Chase would sue Javice for fraud, alleging that most of the 4 million customers Javice claimed to have were completely fake, and that in reality, her company had fewer than 300,000 customers. They accused Javice of inflating the size of her company's customer base in order to boost its valuation, then scrambling to cover up her tracks before JPMC discovered her con. As the scandal publicly unfolded, a closer look at Javice's background would reveal that she was a serial entrepreneur with a remarkable ability to attract media attention while accomplishing little, and that she had a long history of making things up. This is the story of Charlie Javice. Charlie Javice, a dual French-American citizen, grew up in wealthy Westchester County, New York. Her father was a hedge fund manager who had worked for over 3 decades as a banker at companies such as Goldman Sachs and Merrill Lynch, and her mother was a former French teacher turned life coach. Javice attended a $40,000 a year bilingual French-English private school, where she was a competitive horse rider. Her family spent summers in Thailand and Myanmar. She gained early admission into the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania, where she studied finance and law, and graduated in just 3 years. Javice launched her first startup in 2011 as a college freshman. It was a nonprofit called PowerUp, a microfinancing organization that claimed to connect students, scholars, and professionals with people in developing countries in need of microloans. Javice told Forbes that 12,000 students had signed up to contribute. The organization gained Javice the 99th spot on Fast Company's 2011 list of the most creative people in business, a list which also included entrepreneurs like Elon Musk. In 2012, PowerUp secured Javice an interview for the Thiel Fellowship, a fund set up by PayPal co-founder Peter Thiel, which offered students a $100,000 stipend to drop out of school to pursue business or research ventures. According to PowerUp's Tumblr page, Javice voluntarily withdrew herself from consideration for the fellowship because she wanted to remain in school. In truth, however, Javice had been eliminated from contention. An email from the president of the Thiel Fellowship to Javice, obtained by the Daily Beast, stated, "Due to the limited size of the program, we are not able to offer you a scholarship." Grameen America, one of the social impact microloan organizations PowerUp claims to have partnered with, told Forbes that they had never collaborated with PowerUp or received any funding from them. A lawyer who assisted in setting up PowerUp admitted that the company had never really taken off. By 2015, Javice had founded her second startup, Tapped. Tapped began as a service that provided job opportunities to young professionals via text message. It then transitioned into a company that provided a new type of credit score for college students as an alternative to the FICO score. Tapped ran into financial trouble, stopped paying employees, and eventually laid off its entire staff. A CTO Javice had brought into the company as she tried to transition it into Frank would successfully sue Javice for failure to pay wages and was awarded approximately $35,000. Frank was officially launched in 2017. Javice claimed that the name Frank meant honest and was meant to convey an image of a trustworthy uncle or cousin that you could turn to for advice. In an early investor meeting, Javice claimed that thousands of students had already signed up for Frank, when in reality, the service wasn't even built yet. When employees confronted her afterwards, Javice responded, "Listen, these old people don't get it. This is how it works. You fake it till you make it." After Frank became operational, it faced various obstacles, ranging from minor to more serious. In 2017, the Department of Education accused Frank of potentially misleading students to believe it was affiliated with the government. Frank was forced to change the name of its website from frankfafsa.com to withfrank.com, and to clearly state on its website that it had no government affiliation. In 2020, 4 members of Congress wrote a letter to the FTC accusing Frank of misinterpreting information about a federal pandemic aid program, and they called for a temporary restraining order against what they called Frank's deceptive practices. They also accused Frank of harvesting student data and selling it to third parties for profit. The FTC issued Frank a warning letter. Javice's knowledgeability about the financial services provided by her company was also questionable. 2 op-eds she wrote for the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal had to be followed up with paragraph-long corrections because Javice had misstated regulations and included outdated information. Nevertheless, when one of Frank's investors pitched the company to JP Morgan Chase, JPMC was interested. The main attraction was Frank's college-aged customers. Young customers were valuable in the banking industry because they tended to remain customers for life. JPMC hoped it would be able to market its banking services to Frank's purported 4 million customers. There was just one problem. The claim on Frank's website that it had helped over 4 million students secure billions in financial aid wasn't quite honest. Javice was counting every visitor to Frank's website as a user. The number of users who had actually signed up to use their service, however, was only about 300,000. When a different company had attempted to acquire Frank, they had carefully asked Javice to clarify whether the number of users she was describing referred to actual user signups or impressions on their website, that is, website visitors. Javice begrudgingly admitted the truth. The other company abandoned its bid less than 24 hours later. This time, with JPMC, Javice decided to lie. Javice provided JPMC with spreadsheets specifically stating that 4.265 million students had started a FAFSA form with Frank, which required creating an online Frank account, that more than 2.1 million students had fully completed the FAFSA with Frank, and that there had been over 34 million visitors to Frank's website in 2020 alone. She repeated claims of over 4 million customers in at least 6 charts or slides. JPMC's due diligence team asked Frank to provide a list of its 4 million customers. They wanted assurances that Frank's customer accounts specifically included data on first names, last names, date of birth, phone numbers, mailing addresses, and email addresses. They asked, in writing, how many customers had 100% of this data and how many had only partial information, and emphasized that this information was critical in order to proceed with the acquisition. Javice initially pushed back on the request, citing customer privacy concerns. But after JP Morgan insisted, a desperate Javice decided to invent a list of over 4 million fake customers. At first, Javice and her chief growth officer, Olivier Amar, asked Frank's chief engineer to create a fake list of customers using synthetic data techniques, that is, using algorithms. The engineer asked whether this would be legal. Javice assured him that she didn't believe anyone would end up in an orange jumpsuit over it. But the engineer was still uncomfortable and refused to do it. So Javice reached out to a data science professor at a New York City area college who advertised creative solutions to data problems. In just 3 days, the professor created a list of 4.265 million fake customer accounts. He sent Javice an invoice that included an itemized list of all the fake data fields he had created, including items like first name, last name, and college major. The total charge came to $13,300. Javice immediately asked him to resend the invoice with only one line item saying data analysis and to increase the charge to $18,000. Due to Javice's claims of having privacy concerns about sharing Frank's customer data directly with JPMC's due diligence team, JPMC agreed to use a third-party data management vendor called Axiom to validate Frank's customer information. The fake customer list was sent to Axiom, who then sent JPMC a validation report confirming that the list contained over 4 million entries and that all the data fields JPMC had inquired about were present. The JPMC team therefore never saw the initial fake list. Satisfied with the validation report, JPMC proceeded to acquire Frank for $175 million in September of 2021. Javice secured $10 million as part of the deal and was promised an additional $20 million retention bonus, which would vest at a later date if she remained in good standing. Olivier Amar, the chief growth officer, received $5 million and a $3 million retention bonus. As part of the deal, Javice was hired at JP Morgan as a managing director overseeing student-focused products at Chase, and Amar was made a managing director of student solutions at JP Morgan. After the sale, Javice wrote on LinkedIn, "It's not every day an entrepreneur gets her fairy tale new beginning, not ending." Despite the acquisition, the con wasn't yet complete. Javice and Amar knew that eventually JP Morgan would attempt to use Frank's customer list to market its financial services to what they believed were real college students. Javice and Amar knew that they had to replace that fake list with a list of real student names and real student information before JP Morgan figured out their ruse. They had already begun covering their tracks. Javice and Amar had asked Axiom, the third-party validator, to destroy the customer list as soon as they had sent the validation report to JP Morgan. While Javice had been working with the data science professor, Amar had been working to secure a list of real college students from a data aggregation company called ASL Marketing Inc., which purported to have the most comprehensive list of high school students, college students, and young adults available anywhere. Amar requested a list of 4.5 million college students. ASL warned that only 2.4 million of them would have email addresses, but all 4.5 million would have mailing addresses. A desperate Amar relented and purchased the list of 4.5 million students for $105,000. Javice and Amar then spent an additional $70,000 to purchase the services of yet another company, Informion. Informion ran the ASL list through its databases in an attempt to find matching additional data, including email addresses, from publicly available information. They found email address matches for 1.9 million of the 4.5 million students on the ASL list. Javice and Amar then instructed the data science professor to use the Informion data to augment the information on the ASL list. Javice and Amar would end up paying the data science professor over $50,000 in total, including for his work on the initial fake list. The students on ASL's list were not actual Frank customers, but these students actually existed, unlike the names on the fake list, whose information had been completely made up by algorithms. On January 6, 2022, just a couple of months after the acquisition, JPMC requested a copy of Frank's customer list. Javice and Amar, still scrambling to create a list with more complete contact information, delayed for 3 weeks, citing issues with their engineering team. Eventually, they sent JPMC customer lists cobbled together from their real Frank customers, student names from the ASL list, and Informion data. It wasn't until more than 6 months later, in July 2022, that JPMC finally decided to use Frank's customer list in a marketing campaign. They realized something was wrong when they sent out an email to a random sample of 400,000 Frank customers with offers to open Chase checking or savings accounts. Only 28% of the emails were successfully delivered, with only 1.1% of the emails opened, far lower than JPMC's typical rates of 99% delivery and 30% opened. Only 103 students even clicked through to Frank's website. JPMC launched an investigation and immediately discovered everything about the data science professor, ASL marketing, and Informion. Javice and Amar had used their Frank company email accounts to carry out all their dealings with these parties, and those email accounts became the property of JP Morgan once they acquired Frank. Javice and Amar were placed on administrative leave during the investigation, then subsequently fired. In November 2022, JP Morgan sued Javice for fraud. Olivier Amar was also named in the lawsuit. The lawsuit read, in part, in every aspect of her interactions with JPMC, Javice had a choice between 1. Revealing the truth about her startup and accepting Frank's actual value, and 2. Lying to inflate Frank's value and reaping the rewards from that inflation. Javice chose each time to lie, and the evidence shows that time and again she layered fraud upon fraud to deceive JP Morgan. Shortly after JPMC placed her on leave, Javice transferred several $1 million she had made from the acquisition into a newly created shell company, Chariot Holdings X LLC, in order to prevent JP Morgan from clawing it back. She later filed a countersuit accusing JPMC of wrongful termination, claiming that she had warned JPMC about restrictions surrounding student privacy laws. After the deal, Javice alleges, JPMC realized that they couldn't work around those privacy laws, and they were trying to retrade the deal in order to avoid having to pay her the remaining money she was owed. Unfortunately for Javice, the feds weren't buying her story. In April of 2023, Javice was arrested, and the Manhattan Federal Court charged her with securities fraud, wire fraud, bank fraud, and conspiracy. Each charge carries a maximum sentence of 20 to 30 years in prison. She is currently out on $2 million bond awaiting trial. A fascinating thing about Javice is that several media outlets noted that she had seemed completely normal. Unlike other notorious Millenial founders, she didn't seem to have any gimmicks, like Elizabeth Holmes's black turtleneck and deep voice, or Sam Bankman-Fried's image of billionaire philanthropist who drove a cheap car. Former Frank employees described Javice as a regular person who didn't act like a typical rich kid and wore jeans, a hoodie, and scuffed sneakers every day. Someone who knew her in college said she actually seemed nice. But the person did add one thing about her, that she had the tendency to name drop all the business bigwigs she had met, ostensibly to make herself appear a bigger deal than she really was. Interestingly, someone from the Thiel Foundation said almost the exact same thing, accusing Javice of dropping names and pretending to know more inside baseball about the tech industry than she actually did. In her dealings with JP Morgan, Javice tried to make her company seem larger than it actually was, making it appear to have more reach and more market penetration than it actually had. We have also seen that from the very beginning, Javice was also very comfortable with lying in pursuit of her goals. After Javice's JP Morgan scam was exposed, one person familiar with her told Forbes, this is exactly what she had been doing, what she has been doing all along, and now she has gotten caught for it. Javice appears to be yet another example of a millennial CEO who took the ethos of fake it till you make it too far and appeared to believe that lying as a means to an end was acceptable. Unfortunately for Javice, her attempt to fake it till she made it ultimately fell short.